Why has Gen Z checked out? Participation in society used to be based on an unspoken deal. If you paid attention at school, worked hard, and treated people with respect, eventually everything would fall into place. Society had set structures which guaranteed that the people who followed the rules would actually get something out of it. A home, a family, a purpose, something that maybe added meaning to their lives. But over the past few decades, all of that was systematically stripped away. It was the lie we were told growing up. Gen Z has been subject to a lot of trauma, losing social skills amid the digital age, government failures, and societal shutdowns. This has left millions feeling lost, lonely, and hopeless, with no clear future to aim for. Degeneracy is running rampant, and depression has become almost normalized. Gen Z feels like a failed generation, failed by society, and they have come to the understanding that society has broken its social contract with them. And despite being freer than any previous generation, they struggle with a lack of meaning, a lack of identity. So how did we reach a point where nihilism and hopelessness define our generation? Well, to understand the roots of this disillusionment, we need to look back at the shift in societal structures over time. Just a few hundred years ago, people's understanding of the world was cohesive and derived from the immediate surroundings, with beliefs shaped by local knowledge and traditions handed down through generations, shaping both individuals and communities. This structure was disrupted by the Enlightenment and Scientific Revolution, which expanded worldviews and complicated lives, diminishing the dominant role of religion and introducing ideologies in its place. As society modernized, traditional communities found themselves on the brink of collapse, and their social structures were gradually replaced by ideological ones. People's loyalty and sense of belonging shifted from their local communities to their nation-states and the ideas these nations embodied. The internet and mass media have since obliterated these shared experiences, replacing a singular belief system with a multitude of conflicting desires and subjective views. By the time they're 13, today's kids are immersed in a chaotic sea of ideas, judgments, and opinions about right and wrong, desirable and disgusting. This shift is partly due to postmodernism, a late 20th century movement which signifies a shift from believing in a single grand narrative to embracing multiple narratives, promoting subjectivity, individualism, and an instability of meaning. Historically, pre-modernism placed God as the ultimate truth, while modernism, driven by the scientific method, positions science as the path to progress and truth. In our current postmodern era, the proliferation of media and global knowledge has led to countless competing truths. This overwhelming diversity forces individuals to determine their own truths, leading to directionlessness and purposelessness. The absence of a singular guiding narrative fosters uncertainty and mistrust, both personally and within communities, as people struggle to find meaning and certainty in their lives. But this didn't happen by accident, it happened by design. You see, Gen Z was born into the tech boom, with instant access to global communication and information right in their pockets. While these innovations may seem harmless at first glance, this generation didn't perceive them as groundbreaking, but rather as everyday norms. Gen Z grew up doing everything on their screens, from messaging friends and watching videos to playing games, dating, documenting their lives, and shaping their identities and beliefs. This seamless integration of technology into daily life has fundamentally shaped their worldview and interactions, making the digital realm an intrinsic part of their existence. This immersion of the digital world has not come without consequences. One of the strangest episodes of Black Mirror that I've watched is the Striking Vipers episode. In summary, two friends who played video games together in college reconnect years later when technology has advanced. They begin playing an updated version of their favorite college video game, Striking Vipers. As they immerse themselves into the game, the two characters are somehow warped into the bodies of the fighters within the game. And as they're gearing up to start fighting, all of a sudden things get Black Mirror weird, and they start making out within the virtual reality of the game. And what at first was a novelty soon becomes a dependency. One of the friends even has withdrawal symptoms after the other stops playing. Now, why this is relevant is that it shows us the reality of Gen Z. We are in what I would call a digital dark age. Gen Z is intensely addicted to their phones, video games, and adult content, seeking short-term pleasures to escape their bleak realities. This addiction is so pervasive that many spend over 10 hours a day on their devices, driven by short-form content, dopamine triggers, and addictive algorithms. If they're not captured by TikTok, a Reels binge session is waiting for them on Instagram. and if not Instagram, then even shorts on YouTube. It's all encompassing and there's no escape. And it's easy for people to retreat into this world of information. Philosopher and sociologist Jean Baudrillard describes this world as hyperreality, a sort of world beyond worlds made up of meanings behind objects and people rather than what they actually are. Things and concepts which exist in the real world like beauty, tragedy, virtue, and vice all get warped and maximized. Beautiful people become impossibly perfect with computer editing and filters. Every crisis from around the world is suddenly right in front of you until it's quickly replaced by something else. The craziest outbursts and the most violent altercations rise to the top. These forces are most noticeable in people's sexual identity and preferences. Overstimulation and seeing all of your desires digitalized eventually gets boring for people. The more immersed in hyperreality they become, the harder it is for them to quench these desires. Everything becomes more and more extreme and detached from actual reality. Baudrillard describes this hyperreal world as being far more intense and ecstatic than the real world that we live in. People find themselves escaping the harshness of reality for a digital world filled with symbols and subjectivity. Even if one doesn't become fully immersed in hyperreality, it still influences the world around them. Values and beliefs shift to mirror the constantly changing landscape of public opinion. Objects and people are valued based on their perception of this hyperreal world rather than their actual worth, turning them into mere symbols. Before our current reasons for purchase and consumption, the value of a commodity was typically based on the amount of labor put into it, how it compared to other objects in the market, and its usefulness. What has overtaken all three of these types of values in the postmodern era is a commodity's sign value. This refers to how an item distinguishes itself in a system of objects through what it represents. Today, the objects we surround ourselves with and interact with are primarily valued for their symbolism, how they influence our perception in a social hierarchy. What happens when the majority of Western society interacts with objects based around status, wealth, upgradability, replaceability, and mobility? It creates a society focused on outward appearances, wealth, status, and other forms of symbolism. The commonality amongst these is a lack of depth and humanity. In a Western world revolving around signs, these signs become indistinguishable from reality and become more real than the objects themselves. This has created what I mentioned earlier, hyperreality. And this is the world that Gen Z grew up in. A solid way this has been portrayed in the media is in the movie They Live. The protagonist of the movie has a pair of sunglasses that, when worn, show him the ideology or the sign behind each object in his environment. This movie came out all the way back in 1988, but over 35 years later, this is the world that we currently live in. When John Nada looks at the advertisement, it says obey. Another sign says no independent thought, followed by another one that says consume. And I must admit, when I first saw this, I couldn't help but think how accurate this is in the present day. It's the world that Gen Z was molded in, and there's just no escape. When John looks at the money, it says, this is your God. And when you really think about it, we do see this in modern reality. I must pay $1,000 for the latest iPhone, even though the only change from the last version is a slightly bigger screen. I must watch the news and make every problem my problem. I must pay $280 for the latest Yeezys, even though they are ugly as hell. We aren't buying these things because they are particularly good shoes with high quality materials that take a long time to make. We buy them because of the story behind the brand. We buy a simple tick mark because of what it represents and how it changes how people view us in the social hierarchy. When we go on social media and see content that highlights the most polarizing, controversial opinions and actions, we start to see that more and more in our reality. The more that media becomes closer to reality through technological advancements, the more it actually affects reality itself until what is real and the signifier of the real thing are no longer easily separated. Our world is now one of easily replaceable and movable signs, and humans are treated and treat others as such. This transition to a hyperreal world has also been portrayed in movies like American Psycho, Taxi Driver, and Fight Club. It's no wonder that young men, when watching these movies and seeing the main characters' personalities, can't help but say, he's literally me. And this is why living in this world, especially growing up in it, makes finding genuine meaning much harder when everything's value is based on shifting opinions and an invisible social hierarchy. Nothing has any lasting significance. Hyperreality becomes even more alluring when you put down the phone and take a real look at today's world. Following the advice of previous generations doesn't work well anymore. The world has changed so drastically that their roadmap no longer applies. For most people, finding someone special, settling down, buying a home, the white picket fence, and having children just isn't feasible. The root of the problem is economic. What your grandparents had to do to achieve the white picket fence life is completely different to what is required today. In the 1960s, as the economy rebounded from World War II, the United States government encouraged families to move into the suburbs. At that time, the price-to-income ratio for owning a home was 2, meaning the average American family could purchase a house with just 2 years' worth of household income. Fast forward to today, and the ratio is nearing 6. It would take 6 years of wages just to buy one home. The situation is even worse in big cities like London, where the ratio has only just decreased to 12. It's no wonder residents in big cities like Barcelona are spraying tourists with water guns, trying to drive them out, because of the tourism ramping up the cost of living. In other big cities like Los Angeles, you need to earn over $220,000 annually to be able to afford the average home and comfortably repay the mortgage. If you live in New York, you need to earn over $1.4 million before you can even think about putting in an offer for a house. These big cities are the ones that attract young people for work and higher wages, but have become far more challenging to establish a foothold in. And this is the dilemma for Gen Z. They are the first generation to grow up with participation trophies, never knowing what failure feels like. But now the reality of life is hitting, and the broken promises of society are manifesting. Living paycheck to paycheck while paying off someone else's mortgage leaves little to no safety net. The high cost of living makes it difficult for people to manage their lives, and adding childcare expenses explains why so few are having children anymore. Given these challenges, is it really any surprise that Gen Z is checking out? It isn't just housing either. Inflation has meant that everything has gotten so much more expensive. Corporate profiteering and price gauging haven't helped either. But as everything has gotten more expensive, wages have continued to stagnate for most. Since 1979, the bottom 90% of the US saw their income rise by around 24%, adjusting for inflation. Meanwhile, it doubled for the top 1% of the country. Hyperreality has distracted people from these issues. They still know it's happening and feel the impact, but the constant bombardment of irrelevant information leaves them powerless to take action. This endless cycle absorbs and dilutes their rightful outrage. Real anger and emotions that could spur genuine action get lost in cyberspace, into a hashtag, into a black square, merging with billions of other opinions and fading into background noise. Events move so quickly that we can't fully process them. Humans aren't equipped to handle such an overload. And as a result, hyperreality becomes a blur, like you're traveling through it all so fast that you can only get a sense of the underlying emotions. The postmodern era is characterized by indivisibility. That's what a lot of people are. They're invisible. We're living in a loneliness pandemic. You live in a giant metropolis, the suburbs, or a rural area, but you are invisible to the people around you. You are not needed and you don't need anybody else. It's easy for people to die in their little apartments and nobody knows and nobody cares. The system is broken. Education, housing, healthcare, retirement, all broken. And that's why Gen Z has checked out, as they are witnessing the demise of every traditional norm in real time. Thank you for watching, and if you want to support, be sure to subscribe and engage with this video, as this is a new YouTube channel. And I'll see you in the next one.